welcome back. In this video, we're going to continue modifying the bouncing sphere here to refine it to have a much more crisper bounce when it meets the ground, because it looks like it's floating, as well as adjust the timing of uh, the bounces themselves to take up less time, because as they bounce higher, they shouldn't be taking the same amount of time as the initial bounce. So work on the timing of the bounces as well as the crisp rebound off the ground as you go. Now to do this, you could do this through the graph editor. I'm sorry, the timeline down here, but it's better and easier to do it through the graph editor. The graph editor is your graphical control over keyframes, and allowing you to manipulate quite a bit more that you can't do as easily at the bottom. So you have to open up the graph editor. It's found under Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor. This will open up a graphical representation of what is happening, what these keyframes are. In this case, it's very simplistic. I only animated the translate Y. And because it's a bouncing ball, we can pretty much kind of easily correlate this graph to what's happening. The ball is dropping, hits the ground, goes up, down, up, down, up, down. Now, by default, Maya creates flat tangents, which is useful for character-based animation. In this case, it's working against us, because what it's doing is it almost looks like the sphere here is hovering. If I scrub the timeline, i.e. left-click down here and drag left and right, you can see that down here where it's got this curve, it's hovering and hovering back up, hovering down, hovering back up. And for those that don't know anything about graph editors, you kind of directly relate the property value here. The steeper this graph is, the more transition there is. So the graph is just time, value over time. Time being across the top, going here. Value being the vertical here. So you can see that as this goes down, literally the Y value is going down, hits the keyframe, the Y value begins going back up, and so on. So the steeper this curve is, the more speed that transition will have. So what we want is this to have a much more instant impact, i.e. hit the ground and bounce right back. And what we could do is we can set all these keyframes, instead of being flat tangents, to be linear tangents. Now in this screen, to move anything around or select anything, it's just with the left key. So I'm just left key holding, dragging this here. And then I'm going to come up to the linear tangents, which looks like this little wand icon right here. That's what I call it the wand. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it'll turn everything from flat tangents to linear tangents, which is also incorrect, but you can see the difference here pretty quickly. So they're just straight lines, very jaggedy. And if you look at this now, it's very robotic. We go bounce, 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 bounce. It looks very mechanical. It looks correct, much more accurate than when it hits the ground. But the falls here are no longer correct, because those are not linear tangents. They were more accurate before. They were flat tangents. So I'm going to stop this. So what we want is a mixture of the two. We want these ones, and it doesn't have to be the first one, because the first one's a drop. We want these ones to be flat tangents, so the peaks. And we want the valleys to be linear tangents, because that's where it's hitting the ground. So I just did everything as linear. Now I'm going to come back and just grab the peaks, and I'm going to make them flat tangents, which looks like these little robot eyes right here. So I'm going to click on this icon, and I'll make them flat tangents. And what you'll see is it looks like little upside down U's, kind of basically. And if we look at this, it should look pretty good already. I mean, there's still going to be some problems, but it should look pretty good. Look at that. We got a bouncing ball. Boom, boom, boom. Now, we still have an issue with timing, and there's a lot of ways we can address this. But generally, and it depends on the material, each bounce should take less time to go back up, because it's going a lesser distance. It's not, I don't have a formula at least memorized for this. I just kind of eyeball it myself, because again, it depends on what it is. This is where I would be looking at reference material if it was, for something other than an exercise. How bouncy is a ping pong ball versus whatever ball you're trying to get. But um, without doing that, I can just generally tell you that each bounce should be less value. How much? I don't know. We're just gonna wing it. So here, what you can do is you can come in here and you can start selecting these keyframes in here or technically down here, and you can just cut and move them, or you can select the values in the graph editor. For example, here, like, okay, I'm gonna make this distance, not 24. It's gonna get there. I don't know. Let's say frame 18. And again, remember, every time you mess with the time, I'm shortening this. That means it's gonna get faster. If you want it to take longer, it's going to be more distance. So what's going to happen is you start moving these things in isolation, which is absolutely fine. You got to remember that you're probably going to mess up all the ones after it. So you're going to have to come in eventually edit every single one of these. And yes, I could come in here and I'm going to say maybe I'll make this one 18. I'm going to shave off 6 frames off this one. And then maybe I'll select this one. And I'll make this one, just for the sake of argument, 24. So you can see this one now has it's much steeper and thinner. So this is going to be a lot faster. And this one's going to be really slow. So this is going to look awful probably. But let's take a look. Let's take a look. Hit play. Boop, 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 boop. So boom, boom, boom. All right. So yeah, you can see that we can do it. We can definitely move these one at a time. What I like to do, and I just undid my actions there by hitting Control Z. What I like to do in this case, and it's a little messy, requires a little cleanup, what I like to do is I actually like to scale the keyframes in here, and to kind of as my first pass. And the good thing about scaling them is we can do it all at once. So if I just select all these keyframes here, basically I have my first initial drop hit the ground. I'm not going to touch those. I want to mess with these keyframes, the rest of these keyframes, and this technically doesn't matter. I like to move this as a marker so it's easier to see. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale them from this point. This actually being here doesn't matter, but again, I like to move it almost so I can visualize it myself. So I'm going to hit the R key, scale. And anything you want to do in this with the tools, well, at least translate and scale, you can do here with these keys. It's just you have to be on that tool, so W if you want to move them, R if you want to scale them. And if you want to scale them, you have to have more than one keyframe really to do anything. So I'm on the R key, the translate scale. You can see scale. And I'm going to middle mouse click here. And wherever you click, that's where it's going to scale from. So I'm going to click here and middle mouse click and start dragging left or right. And you can see it's scaling there. Now, if you want to add a precaution, if you hold down Shift, it will only scale in that property. It's not such a big problem with scale, but translate, that's a good one to do. Hold down Shift as well. So you can see I can come in here and scale these all down a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk, this might be the proper term, but I'm going to walk this back. So I'm going to come up here, I'm going to deselect just these ones, scale these down a little bit more. Oops, sorry. And then I'm going to select these ones, come up here. Again, this doesn't actually matter, just I'm using it for help visualize it. And I'm going to scale a little bit more. So I scaled them all just a little bit more with each time, which is a great fast way to actually get this distance, or time I should say, to be a little bit slower end. This one's a little off, if you ask me. You see. And what I would do is I would move this point. Yeah, I'm just going to move it over there. So I just switched to the translate tool and moved it. So I'm kind of keeping these curves by using the scale and move tool, something where I can see it, kind of visualize this. Now the downside behind this is it will allow you to sometimes take looks like mine might have snapping on. Sometimes it will put the keyframes on a stat that has is not perfect. That personally bothers me. I would go in there and fix them, but in this case it didn't do it that time. So you can see I have them all laid out. Maybe I'll come in and make this one 41 because it's bothering me, it's not even. And then you can see I'm just kind of tweaking this. So again, all I did was a scale tool with the R key, selected them, used the middle mouse button as a button, and then click back and forth. And then I refined it with a few touches of the W key, clicking on one, middle mouse click and hold, and changing it around. And let's see what that looks like. So minimize this. You can see I can't remember what I was at. I think I was in like this, the 70s or 80s. Now I'm all the way down to like the 40s area for the whole animation. Rewind this, and I made it play. Boom, 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 boom. It's a little fast overall. I think the first frame actually should come down. It should take less time to hit the ground overall, and that might be all we need to do. So the whole thing's consistently fast, but that first fall from what I'm seeing here looks a little on the slow side. The bounces look relatively good. I think it's a little too fast overall. But let's get that first bounce fixed and then worry about the overall speed. So I'm going to stop that. Bring this back up. And in this case, I can just either move or scale these. So I can just grab all these keyframes. All I'm worried about is this. This is too slow. I wouldn't have thought it, but this looks too slow. So I'm going to select all these keyframes. And I want to shorten the distance. Again, value over time is the speed. So if I move all these keyframes, I'm shortening the distance between the first two keyframes, which is that first part, that's making that faster. And I just eyeballed, I don't know how many frames that actually cut off. It looks about 4. Rewind, play. So overall, I think that's a much better speed. Stop. This is where we start messing with our preview. Drop down about there. Rewind, stop. I think overall it's a little too fast. That second bounce is a little too fast as well. I mean, now I'm nitpicking. I'm talking about like literally like maybe a frame or two. So like if I come in here, and you guys can play with this all day if you really wanted to. So like if I come in here, maybe just like 1 frame over, and then 1 frame over, like that. So you can see I just extended this one by 2 frames because I did 1 all of them and then 1 here. I just moved them by 1 frame, 1 frame. Again, this is now where I'm getting into the nitpicky part. 1 frame, 1 frame. So you see, I'm going to say I'm happy with that because we've gone pretty far with this. So the outliner, graph editor, sorry, is a powerful tool to manipulate your keyframes. And again, you're doing this largely by using your, well, a couple different ways. You can use your translate tool or your scale tool and move the keyframes or scale the keyframes around, or you can literally select the keys and type their stats and values in here. So you can do it either way. And these, again, by no means the only way, but these are 2 my particular favorite ways of editing keyframes. And then honestly, it's a lot of looking back and forth between this and that. This part takes practice and training your eye based on what you are trying to accomplish. So I do recommend this exercise because it's easy to do a direct correlation of the graph editor with the Y. Because it's a lot harder once the thing starts rolling on the ground, but it's easy to visualize this. So try to get an understanding of how to move keyframes, especially when it's this easy to visualize. And then once you understand them, then you can easily move to the other kinds of properties as well. And then all you have to really kind of worry about is what that graph means, not so much how to manipulate it. Much easier. All right, we'll see you next time, and we'll continue our ball bounce animation in the next video.